revisiting this Deshaun Watson trade. And look, we did spend plenty of time on it on Monday. But going back to the actual Deshaun Watson trade before the 2022 NFL season and breaking it down. And you went down, I know you went back and looked at what did the Browns give up from a draft pick perspective? What did those picks become? What could they have become? But I want to just set this up with what was going on in the NFL at that time. In that 2020 to 22 range, the entire NFL was going all in on offense. They were making monster moves at quarterback. We had seen Tom Brady in 2020 sign as a free agent with the Bucs and win a Super Bowl. We saw Matthew Stafford the following year. The Rams traded for him, and they won a Super Bowl. The Rams at the time had Jared Goff, who right now is running one of the best offenses in the league, if not the best offense in the league. But at that time, the Rams were like, I know this guy went to a Super Bowl. I know he's a good quarterback. We want better. The entire NFL was trying to get a top 8 caliber quarterback, and if they couldn't get that guy, and they had a rookie quarterback or rookie contract quarterback, they would go get an elite receiver. And we saw A.J. Brown traded for before in the 2022 NFL draft by the Eagles. We saw Tyreek Hill traded for in 2022. So the entire league was doing this, right? Upgrade at quarterback, and if you couldn't get the upgraded quarterback, go get the receiver. Russell Wilson trade, Aaron Rodgers trade rumors, which didn't come through until after the 22 season. This was the state of the league at the time. So I just want to lay that groundwork for why the Deshaun Watson trade happened. Because the Browns they were heading into year 5 of Baker Mayfield. Year 4, we talked a lot on this show. He had the shoulder injury. It was his left shoulder. He did it in week 2. He was not the same quarterback for the rest of the year. Yeah. So to that point, really quick, 4 years of Baker Mayfield. It went good, bad, good in 2020. Playoff appearance, beat the Steelers. 2021, bad. So they felt like they had this roller coaster quarterback, mid-level quarterback. Browns wanted to make a big move and go get Deshaun Watson. And I haven't discussed any of the off-field and the fact that Watson had been suspended for the whole 21 season. So that's a little bit of the background for how we got here.
Yeah, and the good in the second good year that Baker had was not just good, it was really good by the end. It was basically the year that Jordan Love had last season, where it started off pretty good, and then by mid-season, like a switch flipped, and he became one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. Like, that's what Baker had the year before he hurt his shoulder. And there was talk, like that offseason, does he get the contract going into that year based off the year he just had? And they're like, no, we'll wait. He goes into this year, hurts his shoulder in week 2, aggravates it as the year goes on, gets progressively worse. And then by the end of that year, they decide, you know what, we're going to go in a different direction. We're going to cut bait on Baker and go get our star.
So what was Watson at the time as a football player? In 2020, the Texans were 4-12. They were terrible. He was good. He was coming off of his best season statistically, whether you're using PFF or any other advanced metric or any traditional metric. Watson was a good quarterback. Up until that point, the Texans weren't a great team. He produced well. He was a very good quarterback, and it looked like he had taken a step to become an elite quarterback while the entire team crumbled around him. That was 2020. End of the season, all of the allegations come against him. He sits on the Texans roster the entire 2021 season as a lot of this stuff's getting sorted out. It was a weird world where the NFL wasn't suspending him, but the Texans weren't playing him, and he just sat.
Yep.
And then before the 2022 season, they hand down a 12-game suspension, and the Browns are in the running to trade for him. I believe the Falcons were involved. The Saints were involved.
But they traded for him before the suspension.
Before the suspension, right? Before the suspension was announced, and he made his debut against the Texans. You knew that after the fact because you knew he was already on the Browns. But they traded for him, suspension unknown, and competing with the Falcons, competing with the Saints. The Browns were reported to be out of the running, and then within a day or two, they were back in. And they were back in because they went fully guaranteed for the 4 years.
Yeah, so that's another element of the desperation to make the move in the first place, right? There are a bunch of hallmarks that show you how desperate they were. Number one, the report you just mentioned that they were behind. They were out. The The Falcons were expected to get him. The Saints were expected to get him. The Browns were supposedly done. They'd kicked the tires. They'd investigated. They tried to make it happen, and they were behind. They were out. The fact that it went from that to they were the team, that's number one. The fact that how much they traded to get him is number two. The contract that they gave him, which is still basically seen as an outlier throughout the NFL. Normally, the next big quarterback contract is kind of used as the benchmark for the one after that. From the outset, the rest of the NFL was like, what the hell is this contract? This doesn't count. It's an outlier. It's a freak contract. This is not precedent, right? Nobody else has used this Deshaun Watson contract as precedent to get the next 5-6 year fully guaranteed contract. The league has seen this as the act of a desperate team from day one. And then the third point, that they didn't know what the suspension was going to be when they traded for him. They knew something was coming down the line. It could have been a year. It could have been multiple years. I mean, I'm sure they had feelers out with the NFL and were sort of, poking around, trying to get an idea. But they traded for this guy knowing that something was coming in terms of suspension, but not knowing how long, having already seen him sitting on the sideline for a whole year. So a whole bunch of things basically show you how desperate a move this was for Cleveland.
And the one last thing I just want to add about the context of the league at that point. We've been talking a lot about top 8 quarterbacks on the show for a while. We used to call it the Matt Ryan inflection point, right? Matt Ryan is like QB 8 in the NFL, and if you're above Matt Ryan, you're just giving yourself a much better chance to win a Super Bowl. The previous 10 to 12 years in the league at this point, Tom Brady had 4 Super Bowl wins. Patrick Mahomes had a Super Bowl win, was on the cusp of others. Peyton Manning had one, even though he wasn't great at the time. But it was all the elite quarterbacks had the best options, the best opportunities. Or you had Matt Ryan in his MVP caliber season going. He's the inflection point. Or you had a rookie contract quarterback who made a Super Bowl type of run. Jimmy Garoppolo made it to the Super Bowl. Jared Goff made it to the Super Bowl. This is what the league was. You either had a top 8 quarterback who is capable of going on the run, a Matthew Stafford, or you had a rookie contract quarterback, or you had the random outliers. Hey, Carson Wentz was a rookie contract quarterback. He gets hurt. Nick Foles goes on an incredible run. Like, you had a couple outliers in there. And previous to that, you'd get like a random Super Bowl run by Joe Flacco or Eli Manning. But for the most part of the last 20 to 30 years in the NFL, if not more, elite quarterbacks, top 8 type of quarterbacks give you a better shot. So that's all that to say. That's like, I think, the football reasons why they went and made this Deshaun Watson trade. They said, he's an upgrade over Baker Mayfield. We're going to build this good roster around him and go make a run.
Yep.
And then what happened?
It was a disaster. Deshaun Watson has been pretty universally terrible from that point on.
Yeah.
And they could have had much better.
And I want to try, I don't want to completely separate the football from the off field. I mean, clearly, like, 2 things have changed since the last time we've seen Deshaun Watson play football well, right? Like, he's had all of these allegations, and there's a chance that all of that happening has just coincided with him being bad at football as well, all at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm trying to say this properly here, right? Like, everything fell apart for Watson since that point. So I'm trying to isolate what the Browns were probably thinking from a football standpoint, and then also what they, pushed aside from an off-field perspective to go and make this football move. So that's that. Now,
just one really interesting element of all this, the last good year, the year before Baker hurt his shoulder. You know where he ranked in PFF grade?
In 2020?
Yeah.
8th?
8th.
Yeah.
The inflection point.
He was at the inflection point.
That's the thing, right?
He
was literally at the inflection point.
Let me describe the inflection point, though, because when we're talking rankings, right? And when I say a top 8 quarterback, that doesn't literally mean the guy is going to rank in the top 8 every single year. Mm-hmm. It just means if you take a 5-year sample, he'll probably be in the top 8, 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5, like most of the time. Go look at Matt Ryan's career, right? He is, in his era, if you added it all up by any metric, passer rating, QBR, PFF grade, he's got 6, 7, 8, 9. He's in that range, right? In all of those metrics, probably in his era. And and there were some years where he was below that. And there was one year where he's an MVP and, met Kyle Shanahan, was in year 2 of Shanahan's system, and they had all the playmakers and they destroyed the league. So Baker only had 1 year in that. But, his rookie year, he was 10th. I think. His third year, he was 8th. Like, he was on the cusp of being that guy, but he was just so inconsistent, right? When they gave him OBJ, he got worse. When the O-line fell apart a little bit, he got worse. Like, he was a little circumstantial with some of his production.
Yeah, it's just fascinating to me that,
that
in the inflection point where it's like, do we have the guy, do we not have the guy? Baker is literally on the line at the point where they're making the decisions effectively, and they chose to go away from him and instead embraced Deshaun Watson. And from that point on, it's been an unmitigated train wreck.
Mohal is asking again, like, can we rewind the tape and look at our takes at the time? What do you think your take was at the time? You've always been a Baker defender in that the Browns should have given him another chance.
Yeah. Well, no, so not even that. Yes, look, I think going away, I think Baker Mayfield got punished for Baker Mayfield being gritty and playing through a shoulder injury that he should have been protected from. Somebody out there, Baker is the type of player. Like, think of what he did in his college career, what he did to get to that point. This is a guy who was a walk-on multiple times, who battled against the odds, who is the classic Rocky underdog, right? That guy is going to stick his face in a fan anytime it's an option. And if that's not the best thing for him, somebody else is responsible for protecting him, right? For holding him back from damaging himself. Baker went out there and tried to play through a busted shoulder for an entire season. And very early on, it was clear that that wasn't going to work, right? Or at the very minimum, that it did not reflect who he was as a quarterback. We saw that the year before. He was vastly better in that season. He was a top 10 quarterback and ascending. And he plays through that shoulder injury, trying to do the team good. And the team reacted to that by saying, thanks for that. Now we're going to go in a different direction. We're not even going to use it as a bargaining tool to knock your number down. We're just going to get rid of you. I think that's bullshit. I think that's a crappy way of dealing with things, even in a business like the NFL, where, personal sort of feelings often go to the side and it's a business decision. I think that was a really crappy way of handling the situation. I think they did Baker Mayfield dirty, and they backed that up by then going after a guy with all kinds of moral question marks around him. The Cleveland Browns do not come out of this well, even independent of the fact that it's been an unmitigated disaster on the field.
And then I'll try to go back and get into headspace that I would have been in at the time when this move was made. And I have to separate the football from the off-field just for the sake. The football discussion, I have been firmly in the camp of you want a top 8 quarterback. And you make the moves to go do that so that you can make a run. If you don't have a top 8 quarterback, you probably need a Kyle Shanahan, right? You probably need a guy that's going to be a consistent offense elevator who can bring a Jimmy Garoppolo to the Super Bowl and bring a rookie Brock Purdy and a year 2 Brock Purdy on the cusp of a Super Bowl. Now, again, I think Brock Purdy's evolving into a top 8 quarterback, but I don't know that he definitely was at the time. You know what I mean? So I probably would have said, you take this chance from a football perspective to go get the quarterback. And I probably would have said the same thing about Denver going to get Russell Wilson. I had my concerns about how well Russell Wilson was playing at that time, which is different from Watson, right? The last time we had seen Watson, he had played well. We just hadn't seen him in over a year. And with Russell Wilson, we hadn't seen him play good football in about a year and a half, right? So I say go make that move. For the Jets, I probably say go make that move for Aaron Rodgers, right? Now, I might look stupid on all of those moves at this point, but I always ask, what's the alternative? What's the alternative at quarterback? The Browns had the best alternative there. The Broncos did not. They had this revolving door of mediocre quarterbacks. They couldn't get over the hump.
Yeah.
The Jets have obviously had this revolving door of subpar quarterbacks. So you have to take these chances because the alternative is doing the same thing. The Browns were the only team who had at least a better alternative than these other teams that made these big moves for quarterbacks.
That's why this is so much worse. I actually don't think you should separate the football from the non-football in terms of Deshaun Watson, because that's part of the equation, right?
Listen, just to be clear, I'm not separating it as part of the decision. Like, if I'm in the building in Cleveland, obviously that's a massive part of the decision. I'm talking about in a vacuum to go from previously mid-tier quarterback to previously top 8 quarterback. I like that move in isolation, in football terms only, before we have the discussion of who this dude is
yes.
and what's going on.
So
just to be clear.
There's a blue sky meeting somewhere in the Cleveland Browns front office, right, where they say, hey, look, Baker Mayfield right now is sitting at this Matt Ryan inflection point. Let's assume they talk in our parlance, right? Baker Mayfield last year, he was at the inflection point. This year, obviously, things went bad with the shoulder injury. We don't think he's the guy, right? We think he's going to be below the inflection point for his entire career. Let's go get someone above it, right? And you're like, okay, cool. Good call. I like your thinking. I like the cut of your jib, sir. Who are the names? Give me some names. Who's available? Well, there's one name, and he's got 23 accusations of sexual assault against him right now. His name's Deshaun Watson. He's fresh. He's been sitting on the sideline for a year. Let's go get him, right? If that's the solution, I think fairly clearly you go, okay, maybe we were too hasty with Baker. Maybe he can be above the inflection point. Maybe we could just make the inflection point work. It's not that bad, right? Very quickly, like as soon as you identify who's available and the answer is a one-name list and the one name is that, I think you have to say, okay, we need to change tack here. And instead, they went, no, let's go for it. And let's go all in. Let's go nuts. And then when you get him in the building, just start talking about how confident you are in him as a person. You know, I have a ton of faith in Deshaun Watson as a human being and as a quarterback. That was like the opening press conference was like the PR people had one line. Just repeat this. Whatever the question is, circle back to this. That's your line. Then we'll be good. You know? So the whole thing was...
all of that was pretty bad from the start.
The whole thing was an amoral exercise in upgrading a quarterback, and they didn't upgrade a quarterback. That's where we are with this.
And now, can you go through the list? Because you tweeted this out last week. Can you go through what they gave up? And then what it
first of all, it's a complicated trade because a lot of those picks that were given to Houston were subsequently traded on, traded down, traded whatever. You didn't end up, it wasn't like for like, you know what I mean? We don't get sometimes you're like, oh, the final pick in the trade is, and now we can see what it was. It's awkward when you do that. Effectively, what the Browns did was give up 3 consecutive first-round picks, 2022, 23, and 24. They gave up a 4th rounder in 2022, a 3rd rounder in 2023, and a 4th rounder in 2024.
But
Houston,
they got a 6 back in 2024.
They did. Somehow they managed to convince Houston to give him a 6th rounder back in 2022. As if that took all suddenly it's a win. You know, we were right on the line with the Jimmy Johnson trade chart, and then we got that 6 back in it. It's a big W for us. Anyway, so I decided to look at it. Okay, forget what they ended up trading at 2 and 2 and 2. If you just took those picks, what could you make out of this deal, right? So I looked at, okay, what if you kept Baker Mayfield and then you had the player that was simply drafted at that pick, right? Forget what you would have done. This is just who got selected at that pick. Jordan Davis, the no tackle for the Eagles. Logan Bruss, remember he was the guy that the Rams targeted as we only have a pick in
pick 103, and he's just made his NFL debut this year after injuries and subpar performance. But
right. So he's that guy. Jahmyr Gibbs, Jalen Hyatt, the speedster that the Giants took, who everyone loved. Brian Thomas, the player who looks like a superstar speedster, and then tight end Cade Stover. So that's who was selected at that draft pick. But then I was like, okay, but that's, you wouldn't have selected those picks as the Browns. I was like, let's go best player available with an idea of what Cleveland would do, right? I.e., they wouldn't just take 6 linemen, presumably. So the best player available, factoring in Cleveland's roster, is all-pro Kyle Hamilton, high-level right tackle Zach Tom / versatile offensive lineman, Minnesota's wide receiver number 2, Jordan Addison, your best player at the Steelers, Nick Herbig.
Yes.
Brian Thomas Jr. is still the best player at that spot. And then running back Braylon Allen, who the Jets have got this year as their running back 2 behind Breece Hall. So either you could have Deshaun Watson playing like ass or Baker Mayfield and that collection of players is what the Browns essentially traded.
It certainly looks bad in hindsight when you look at that.
Yeah.
In addition to, like, if Watson was playing mid-tier football and the Browns were just not getting over the hump, they were just a 8-9, 9-8 type of team. With Watson playing just mediocre football, you'd say, hey, we might question this thing.
If Watson was playing as well as Baker Mayfield is playing right now, it would still look ridiculous because the answer is Deshaun Watson or Baker Mayfield playing at the same level and this collection of all-pros.
Yeah, that's why having a slew of picks is always fun. Like that first option, you didn't hit on every pick, right? Jalen Hyatt hasn't done anything. Logan Bruss hasn't done anything. Right. We don't know much about Cade Stover yet.
Yeah.
But you would have a starting defensive tackle of that group. You have a starting defensive tackle in Jordan Davis who's solid, playmaking running back in Jahmyr Gibbs, and what looks like a high-end wide receiver in Brian Thomas Jr.,
right.
even if he's better than we thought at the time. Is Tyler telling us to wrap it up?
He is, yeah. Tyler's suffering through this at the moment.
Every time we say Browns, just imagine we're saying Steelers. Is that better? Imagine the Steelers did all this, Tyler, and it's not your favorite team. And then we don't have to rehash Monday. We took our time Monday to go through just how poorly the production has been, how poor the production has been on the Browns offense, their passing offense with Deshaun Watson at the helm. And perhaps worse in all of this is that Joe Flacco was sitting on the couch like we were last year, and he stepped in and made the offense look much better. Now, to Flacco's credit, he's doing the same thing in Indianapolis. Maybe he's just good now in his late 30s. And
reportedly, the Browns chose to sort of voluntarily move on from him, like let him walk away, specifically because they did not want to create the type of quarterback controversy that might exist if a guy who had outperformed the starter was sitting there behind him on the bench, which is, number one, it's self-defeating. Number two, it hasn't avoided that at all because people are still like, I don't care how bad Jameis is, he can't be worse than this. Throw him out there. Like it hasn't avoided the quarterback controversy.
Can we just touch the other side of this really quickly? Because you and I were very critical of the Texans for a little while. Nick Caserio takes over, and it seemed like they were just treading water for a couple of years. They didn't know what they were going to get from Watson yet. Right. And while they were treading water, they did not add any impact players to their team. I think the first impact player they really added was in 2022, Derek Stingley. And that was when they started to first get these draft picks from the Browns after they had traded Watson. Now the Texans looking fantastic right now. But here's what they ended up getting for Deshaun Watson. We've got running back Dameon Pierce, the great Tank Dell at wide receiver, Cade Stover, the tight end we already talked about, Kenyon Green, first-round guard, and then Will Anderson at the edge, linebacker Jabal Hill, cornerback Kamari Lassiter, and safety Caden Bullock. Eyeballing that, Dell, call him a starter, Anderson, impact starter, Lassiter and Bullock, starters. So Kenyon Green's a starter. So they've got 5 starters. I'd say 4 of them are at least good or will be good, and I think Cade Stover might have starting potential at some point as well.
Even if you just limit it to the Will Anderson thing, right? The extra picks that the Texans got from Cleveland effectively armed them with the ammunition to be able to go big with that move, right? They already selected their quarterback, which frankly is the most important part of all this, right? They picked C.J. Stroud. That's the single most defining part of this entire thing so far.
Sure.
But they, at the same time, decided they got what we termed at the time greedy. They got greedy and decided, let's go get the best defensive player as well. They only had that capacity, really, because of these extra picks from Cleveland. This enabled them to get greedy or, want to have the best player as well and go get what looks like a guy that's going to be a superstar on the defensive side as well. This enabled that.
Based off this one, the Bryce Young trade, maybe the Russell Wilson trade, some of these trades, should Steve, third person here, should Steve reconsider previous concepts of go get the quarterback at all, go get the top 8 quarterback at all costs?
On the basis that none of them have worked out recently.
You know that it's risky, right? Like, it's high risk, high reward. The theory behind it is, again, you're treading water if you don't have a quarterback, but is the alternative, and we've had a lot of listeners push this way and say, just do everything you can to build the roster. Do everything you can to build the roster. And in, say, like the 49ers case, let's be serious here. They got lucky because we could break down that Trey Lance trade, and that looks just as bad as far as results go, but they stumbled into Brock Purdy. But what makes the Niners great is that they've drafted so well around that, added all these impact players from George Kittle to Debo to Ayuk, make the Trent Williams trade, and it's such a good roster that, you just build that up and then, kind of hope you get lucky at quarterback.
I think what we've seen in the last few years is a real, I don't know if it's increased the power of it or if it's simply reminding people of the power of the supporting cast for the quarterback. even really good quarterbacks cannot just wave a magic wand and fix everything, right? Like, they can definitely move the needle more than anything else out there. But like, Rodgers can't just click his fingers and fix the Jets, right? Rodgers not able to step onto that team. And this is, again, where Tom Brady is just a single freak outlier. Tom Brady walks onto the Bucs and immediately they win a Super Bowl. And okay, they weren't terrible before with Jameis, but they were a mid-level.
They were 7-9.
Right.
I mean, things changed when Brady showed
They were
up.
a classic mid team, right? They were bang slap in the middle, nothing. Brady walks in, click, bam, Super Bowl, right? That's freakish. That's not normal. Nobody else can do that. And everyone's chasing that, right? They're like, Aaron Rodgers is a Hall of Famer. We'll bring him in, click, fixed. Nope, we're still struggling. We're still grinding it out. It hasn't quite worked the same way. So you need to either be chasing, like literally a singular freak show quarterback, a guy like an all-time outlier when you're going after those moves, or you need to have the team that's definitely capable of going on that run almost independent of the quarterback. So like Russell Wilson, even at his peak, probably wasn't that guy where he was going to step on, click, fixed, we're going to the Super Bowl. And he was not that guy at the time when they traded for him. So that was, like I said, a desperation reach for a team that had Drew Lock at quarterback and then Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback. And, this revolving door was like, God, come on, just end it. Do something. Go get a guy. Saying, Rodgers of the Jets is kind of the same thing, right? It's just like, God, just stop the treadmill. Just find an answer. I think that's what we're seeing. Like, these teams just get so desperate of having nobody that they're willing to throw whatever it takes at going after the guy. Whereas really the approach is probably, let's try and keep a good roster together, and then if we have a shot at a quarterback, take the shot. But don't manufacture the shot by throwing 4 first-round draft picks and everything else at putting yourself in that position. Just get yourself in as good a position as you can get, and then if you have if a quarterback in the first round slides into your remit, maybe go flip another first to go get him. But don't get desperate. That's really I think that's the lesson of the last 5-6 years at quarterback trades. Just don't get desperate. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.